All right. Welcome, everyone. And for those of you who haven't met any of us or seen us anywhere, I'm Charlie O'Donnell, and I have Nisha and Claire here. And I'm really excited to have this conversation because Nisha and I first met. When did you guys start the fund?
Version one was in 2014. And you, Charlie, were probably one of the first first GPs we ever met.
So I hope you've gotten I hope I didn't set the expectation too high, really, for other VCs. I may have ruined you for other VCs that you met along the way.
Well, I think you did actually, and this is one of the reasons we're all here together doing an event for Next, which is, I think, one of the things that was unique about our relationship and about the relationship you've had with many GPs is your willingness to share and collaborate and share information. And I think, very early on, you shared, probably one of your fund models with me when we were getting started out. And that was, one of the first data points I had on, okay, how should I think about this? The bar was set very
The fantasy cash flow model,
high. Yeah.
how it's all going to work out perfectly. Everybody's going to start getting distributions exactly in year 5. You're going to have your 3x by year 8. It's every single one of my funds has worked out perfectly like that, and I'm sure yours have too.
Someone recently said to me, so, when did your first carry check kick in? And I was like, you've been talking to people in PE.
Who take it every time they sell a company. Yeah, yeah, for sure. So let's get into it. First of all, let's just do some quick bio and intros. Claire, you're the person of the hour. First of all, congratulations on your promotion.
Thank you.
Why don't you start us off with your brief bio?
Yeah. So we can get into it more, but I joined BBG 5 years ago as an associate, joined out of business school. So I went to Columbia and used that period of time to test out operating and also test out early stage venture. So prior to that, I started my career in investment banking, like many people. And didn't love it. And saw it as like a good training ground for 2 years, and then kind of still wanted to figure out where within the investing landscape I wanted to play. And so actually went to a secondary, then co-investment and direct fund. And so that gave me like a broader view. And then after that that piqued my interest in venture because we touched some venture, but didn't do a lot there. And so then went to Columbia. And so Columbia was kind of like a time for me to test different hypotheses about what I wanted to do. And so worked at Where Hippo, worked at Studs, and then worked on my own idea briefly. And so tried different hats and landed on staying and investing, but going earlier stage. And so that was kind of what I was trying to de-risk with business school. So joined BBG back in 2020.
Cool. And Nisha, you've also got operating stuff in your background and not just VC. So tell us a little bit about how you.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a bit of a windy foray into VC. I was actually a mergers and acquisitions lawyer doing public and private M&A in Australia. Don't let that age me. You can be a lawyer right out of undergrad in Australia. Hated the law, much more interested in the business dynamics of the deals that I was working on and papering. So went where all people go who do not know what they want to do, which is management consulting. And I got sort of my training ground at Bain and Company for a few years, but had really wanted to be an operator and be inside a business. And so leapt over to New York and joined Susan Line, who's my co-founder in the fund, at AOL. Did not know AOL still existed, but had looked up Susan and thought, this is a person I want to work with. And so I led strategy and operations for what was called the AOL brand group, a 1,300 person group across, by that time, 13 different brands in the suite. And I also, during that time, took over our celebrity gossip website. So I was doing meme growth hacking before, it was even a thing. I also launched my own startup off the back of that, a platform called Built by Girls, which was really trying to figure out, can you use software to scale the concept of mentorship? And so we built a matching algorithm that enabled young women all across America to connect with top tier tech professionals. And so that was kind of some of the first foray into really viewing young women as exciting builders who are not getting funded by venture capital. And that's really I think the original gem of BBG's thesis, which is people who look different, who have unique personal experiences, can drive an added competitive advantage when it comes to building for a market that looks a lot like them.
Cool. And so, speaking of AOL, they are just now turning off the dial-up subscribers.
Finally, I read that 163,000 households are still on dial-up, and
Because they
that was
don't have
something
another
that
option.
surprised. Yeah, that was something that surprised me when I joined AOL. I mean, that subscription business for older folks was a strong revenue driver for a long time. So AI might be coming for you, but a lot of these things are going to last for a while.
For sure, for sure. Cool. So Claire, let's start off with like your day one at BBG. So you started in the middle of the pandemic, and so I don't know how long it was before you got a chance to meet in person, but I'm curious about what your first, sort of the first 100 days. So a lot of folks are in situations now where we're not quite fully back to work, or they have virtual offices, or even when you have an office in VC, half the time everybody's out and about taking meetings. And so I'm curious about that early experience about how did you build relationships within the firm? And are there any lessons that you would take and give from that period, especially folks who are trying to get FaceTime with, the people in their firm, or managing across offices, or doing remote?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I did have the benefit actually. So I started in January of 2020 part-time when I was still in business school. So did have the benefit of about a month with the team in person, but I was still actually in classes at that point in time. And so then mid-March when lockdown happened, we all did go remote, but was fortunate to meet the team in person prior to starting. And so I think, given the structure of our team. It was Nisha, Susan, and myself at that point in time. We also had an EA, but really was kind of naturally getting a lot of direct exposure. And so I think early on, the advice I got when I was joining, and both Nisha and Susan also actually connected me with a lot of other associates at other firms. So I think that's like, and then you start to meet more people and them who you should meet. And so you start to build a network kind of organically. And I think there was like a whole period of doing like lots of COVID Zoom meetings for VCs, but also got the advice to try to just like join as many pitches as you can to really build that motion of what interesting looks like. Like, and I think every fund, even when people change funds, I think has a specific sense of what gets them excited. And so it's trying to level up and like ask questions when you're meeting companies or seeing inbound or reviewing inbound. I kind of just took an approach of like summarizing what I thought was interesting, what I thought we needed to look out for in pitches, and then sharing that with them. And so that was like a good way to get feedback on my thinking. And then over time, you start to get a sense of what the GPs excited. So I think didn't really have to like network internally as much because of the nature of our firm, but I think it's really just like asking as many questions as you can up front. And I think during that like 6 months or so, you have a pretty good window where you're new, you're getting up to speed. And so kind of anything goes from a question perspective.
And Nisha, I'm curious, did you talk to anybody else? I feel like actually at that time you might have even asked me this question, um, as to whether I knew anybody who had brought somebody along, and how you would run that mentoring and education process. And if you look back at that, because you're busy doing your own deals, right? Like you got to get out there, there's deals to be worked on, but at the same time, you're trying to do this sort of talent development. Did you feel like you spent enough time on, were you able to spend enough time on it? And what would you advise for folks on the other side to say, how do you bring talent along when you also need them to go research an industry and just come back with
Yeah.
the work?
Yeah. And Claire, you should absolutely keep me honest on the answer to this question. I would like to think that over time, we have invested a lot of time in mentoring and feedback, but I think I'd be lying if I said I had that all mapped out when we started. When we started, we were a two-person shop. We were just getting going. We were raising our fund. When Claire joined us, we'd done our first close on our first institutional fund, and then COVID hit. frankly, we didn't know whether we would get to our target size, right? We had to reduce our MVP, and then we closed very quickly after lockdown opened. So I think it's fair to say we did not have a mapped out view of what progression should look like and what mentorship should look like. I think what we had was a very open and direct culture, partly driven by me because I had come from management consulting. And in that culture, you give feedback on the go all the time. Now, that is not comfortable for everyone. But I will say, venture is a world of open, honest, intellectual debate. And that is how we get to conviction. And so I think that's something to be aware of as a young person in VC. If you are getting pushback or questioning from your partners, view that as an opportunity to grow and get that feedback that Claire described. So I think for us, it probably took a little while to say, okay, what might this mean for the future? And very often it's prompted by someone saying, what's my career progression here? And so that forced us to really put some structure around it. And I think we might have more structure than most people actually do. And I would credit a good friend of ours, Charlie, Beth Ferreira, who had also put thought into this. And so Beth actually shared a framework that she had put together at her former firm. And then I took that and amended it for our basis, because what we realized was it was really unfair to set an invisible bar for an individual on your team without telling them what went into that. And so we actually have this rubric, which is here's what we expect at the associate level. And then we had to recreate that for principal level. And over time, we had to recreate that for partner level. But I think just by having that, you give someone something to anchor to rather than leaving them sort of wavering in the wind. So it was an evolution for us, but I think it's become really important for every new team member who's joined the firm.
I really hope that rubric doesn't necessarily go viral, because I think I probably only have a VC coaching practice because so many people ask the question of like, what do I need to do? And no one's giving me any guidance. So while I do hope for a good experience for junior people working their way up, it's precisely the fact that people aren't good at this that is the reason I can be helpful. So I'm a little conflicted. Claire, let's talk about sectors, right? Because so many folks, as opposed to just, and you can spend all of your time just responding to the inbound, right? You announce as your fund, like, hey, we're giving away money. I mean, you're buying equity, but you're giving away money and your inbox gets filled, and you could just spend all day responding if you wanted. But the advice is that you should develop a point of view, right? You should have a thesis or a focus. And you've been focusing and have an interest area in healthcare, in vertical AI. Did you start from the beginning saying, like, I would like to specialize? And what was that? Um, what was that like? What steps did you take to develop that? Or did it just sort of emerge organically for what kind of deals you wound up seeing?
Yeah, I mean, when I came in, it was pretty clear that I was expected to be a generalist and cover like all of our sectors. We, invest across work, health, education, climate, consumer, financial security. And so was really looking kind of across all of our deals and developing motions for getting up to speed on them. I think I was just like reflecting on your question. I did start in investment banking covering healthcare and industrials. So I think there's like always areas that I've been interested in, but it really was to your point, kind of over time emerged. Healthcare has always been a big focus for us. And so worked on with Nisha a number of our healthcare deals. And so as we wanted to do more and more there, and I think as we thought about our thesis evolving over time, spent time on thesis work as well. And so that became a really natural area for me to lean in further. To your point, like meet more deals and companies in that space. Then vertical AI, I mean, we've always had a focus on frontline workers, and Susan has always been excited about that arena. So kind of just took that to the next level as AI has evolved, and did a deep dive for the team on that sector. Ultimately ended up doing an investment coming out of that deep dive. And so have continued to develop the thesis there. But I think maybe for people joining funds that are more generalist, I think it's like a bit unnatural to come in, especially if you don't have like relevant industry experience. Like I covered healthcare a bit, but I'm not like I didn't come in as like a deep healthcare expert. So it would have been like a bit unnatural for me to come in and say like I only want to do healthcare here. I think you kind of have to read the room and get a sense for like when it makes sense to start to carve out that focus.
So a lot of non-partners feel like their path to partnership is getting deals done, is building a track record, right? And so as soon as you come in, and I felt this when I was a principal at First Round, I wanted to do deals. And it was more beneficial for my own career to get deals done rather than being the due diligence and research person on somebody else's deals, right? Which is a need when you have partners who are working on a bunch of stuff. And so I'm curious, was there a time where you felt ready to lead a deal and maybe a deal that you pushed on early that maybe felt a little bit risky to do because you don't want to burn that social capital internally? You want to garner that trust. And maybe you could talk about a little bit about that push pull of helping other people with their deals versus building your own track record.
Yeah, I mean, kind of again, when we started, I was the only junior person. So I was working and doing diligence on all of our deals for the most part. I think there was like one where I was on vacation. And so I didn't work on that deal, but was pretty close to most
You
of
don't
our
know what direction things flow.
was close to most of our deals, which I think is just like really fun to know most of our companies well. But over time, and I guess early on, I talked about this kind of first 6 months where you're learning. And then I think in the fall of my first year, there were actually two deals that I was the first point of contact on and had a sense at that point for what was exciting to the team and was able to flag that they were areas that could be interesting and help support and lead diligence on those two companies. And we invested, and one is one of our fund drivers. And so I think that was getting just comfortable with the team up front and having like a bit of a framework for what is interesting and kind of that hat for being able to recognize like a strong company. But yeah, over time, I mean, I think really didn't start to lead deals and to end until I was more in the principal role. And like even then, we as a team make decisions cohesively. And bringing like the partners along the way to get buy-in on the company.
And what was that timeline from how long until you became a principal?
It's a good question. I think it was 3 years. Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, definitely spent some time learning kind of the fundamentals. I like didn't come from venture prior to joining DBG with the exception of like a summer MBA program. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it was, taking kind of like the work I'd already done to the next level and then having like a very defensible argument for why I was excited about the opportunity. And so that's talking to like lots of experts and we put together what do you have to believe in success case for our companies. And so then having like every assumption supported by like research and expert conversations and customer calls and just having like a very well fleshed argument that I was able to present to the team and then also bringing team members in along the way to get up to speed on the company. So it took me a bit of time.
Gotcha. And I'll ask sort of a transition question to get over to Nisha on some of this stuff. So there's always sort of a back and forth conversation on, when can I make partner? I would like to be partner. I mean, this doesn't necessarily come that directly, but also I don't know if there was anything stated up front. And people talk about like partner track positions and whether things were partner track positions or not. So Nisha, when you first hired Claire, did you have intentionality of that this was a partner track position or not? And at what point did that shift, if it did?
Yeah. We did not. When we hired Claire, we were very much a startup. And I would say we're still described as an emerging manager as our second institutional fund. And we tried to create a frame which was sort of like the associate program is a 2-year program. And after that, you might decide you want to become an operator. You might decide you want to stay in venture. That might be with us or it might be with someone else. And we always say that might be with us. And if it's not with us. We'll help you find that next role. And actually, our first associate when we're at AOL is now a partner at another great fund, and we're great co-investors with him. But what I would say is, the room is always there. Even if a role is not a partner track role, the room is always there. Partner is there to be like, partnership roles are there to be won, in my opinion. I think like we're reaching a state in the industry where there's, especially because like, if you think about folks coming out of business school, for example, it used to be go be an investment banker, go be a management consultant. Now it's go be a VC, or now it's actually go start a company, which I think is exciting. But I think there was a moment in time where there was an expectation that if my peer at another fund was being promoted, it is also my time to be promoted. And I think, unfortunately, that's just not the way venture works, right? These are not big firms with, classes of analysts, classes of associates. And when you think about partnership, this is a long-term relationship. And so it's not really about time and seat. There are so many things that go into that. And one of those things is the fund's evolution, right? Like very often the next step can only come with a next fund, depending on the structure of the team and the next size of that fund. So I think that's just important context for people. But I also think like for the right person and for a hungry person, partnership is always an option. You always want to find a way to work with extraordinary people. And, I think when you're looking to hire, you should be hiring people you think could be a partner with you ultimately. That doesn't mean they've got everything at that moment, but you think, I could see this person grow. Like this is an A player and I want them on my team, right? You should never hire someone who fits into a box just for that role right now. That's holding you and your team back. And so, I think we saw that in Claire even during her hiring process. Like she came in kind of guns blazing. Like we were at the tail end of our hiring process and we got introduced to her. And she had done her diligence on us in the same way she would do diligence on a company. And that was reflected in her process, right? So not only did she crush her case study, but it was clear that she had the elements to be really, really great at this job. And I think that was just reflected over time in terms of her hunger for feedback. Like, I think there are some parallels in VC, like to ask for feedback, to ingest feedback and iterate really quickly, that can really propel you in your career. And I think we saw that in Claire really early on. And that's why we created the principal level role for her. We said, like, we want you to stay and grow with this firm.
Gotcha. And over and above just doing good deals, right? Which is the easy way. People say, how do I move up? Well, do good deals. That's the answer.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, sometimes it takes 8 or 9 years to figure out whether your deals are actually any good. What are the other ingredients to partnership that are important? Is it LP relationships and the ability to get money? Is it something about team collaboration? What else is there?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe the umbrella principle is, are you driving value for the firm? And so that could be markups, exits, it could be fundraising. But I think there's a whole bunch of things that sit underneath that are particularly meaningful, especially at a small firm. So on your first point, I think it's not just about doing a great deal. It's about, are you sourcing great deals? Are you winning those deals? And then are you adding value to those deals once you've made the investment? And we talked about some of this already. So then it's about defining a swim lane for myself in this firm. Do I have a point of view, a thesis area? I would say like an inflection point for Claire. She described the first deal she really led. I think that was really after deciding that vertical AI was a place she wanted to play. And she was able to then bring this company Max home to us with great conviction, because she had been developing a thesis, right? And so once you then have a thesis, a swim lane, a point of view, then you're starting to build a brand around that. Do people know why they want to bring their deal to you, not just at this firm, but to you? Are you becoming known for that? So that then becomes about a little bit about external brand. Then I think there are other things like, can you get a deal closed internally? Can you win your partners over, right? You might have conviction. Do they share your conviction? And then you start to see these other pieces evolve, which is like, how do you operate on a board? Okay, you don't have the board seat yet. Are you a board observer? What are you bringing to the table in terms of prepping for the board? helping your partner prep for the board and the follow-ups after that? Are you helping the company with follow-on funding? Are you helping the company in other ways? Maybe it's talent. In Claire's case, she's great at financial modeling. Maybe she's helping the company with their financial models as they're thinking about the growth trajectory of the company. And then for a fund like ours, which is a small fund, there might be other pieces, right? Like this extra work on fund operations. Maybe it's some of the LP communications, prepping for the AGM, or other firm building activities. Now, I think firm building is a bit of a maybe now a useless term because that's really about sourcing and winning, but there's a flywheel. And what I often hear from people in associate roles is like, that's kind of a waste of time, right? Like, I don't want to do that. I just want to win deals. And it's like, well, I'm a partner. I still host breakfast and create lists for breakfast or come up with an idea for breakfast because that's how people know who we are. That's how we win a deal. That's how we meet more companies. So it's, to me, it's all a flywheel. And I think you actually have to be sort of across all.
For sure. And just so everyone has a context, what's the fund size that you're operating out of? Because you mentioned
Yeah.
small fund, but they're small and like I had a small fund. You guys don't really.
Yeah. So we're about 140 or 150 AUM. Our first institutional was, we had some prior firms, but our first institutional fund was 50 million and the most recent fund is 60 million.
Gotcha. Great. Why is it rare that people get promoted from internally to partner? It seems like a lot of the new partner announcements are across firms. People bounce around between different firms, or it's somebody who maybe doesn't even have a venture background, but they were like an angel investor or something else like that. And it seems the exception that people get promoted all the way to partner.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of focus today on sourcing and network. And so there can be a perception that if you're coming from another firm or from an operating background, you're bringing a new set of networks to the firm. And I think that's a fair note. I think when you're looking at operators, there is, I think there's a new set of beliefs that you need to have observed and understood the way companies are built and scaled, maybe to have an opinion on them. I don't think everyone agrees with that, but I think that's certainly a profile we're seeing more and more. And by the way, I think we're also seeing that not work out. We're seeing a lot of operators come into venture and maybe finding that it isn't for them. But I think those two things do not necessarily bind to someone who has grown up in venture. But I would say the third reason is lack of mentorship, right? I think that VC is inherently a pretty individual business. And so most people are heads down, focused on their own deals. You might be focused on running the firm as well. And so people are pretty stretched. So they're not spending the time to say, here's what I want to see from you to make the next leap. And that's partly why we have this rubric. And that's partly like, you can probably ask Claire this, like why I'm really pushy in investment committee meetings. Like I want to help the person get to the next step. I think it's not just in their benefit. I think it's to our benefit, and so like with any associate, my question always like is, what's your point of view? Like, what's your opinion on this? And do you have something to back it up? Claire just talked about the incredible amount of work that goes into having conviction on a thesis. And, I don't know that many people have the time or the intentionality to do that with their juniors. Maybe that might be unpopular to say in front of a large audience, Charlie, but
I mean,
I
to
think
be honest,
that's probably what's happening.
based on my coaching experience, I think you're 100% right, actually. And there is sort of a lot of people operate based on incentives, right? And it's not clear that GPs at firms are in any way incentivized. In fact,
Yeah,
I would argue that they're economically disincentivized
I think that's true.
to bring up junior people, right?
Yeah.
Because if you bring up someone
Any
who becomes partner,
any partner takes away from your own carry, right? So you have to love that person. You have to say, I want to see you succeed, and that I believe by adding you to my partnership, my piece of the pie is going to get bigger. And I also think, when you think about mentorship too, there are different styles of mentorship. And I would also say on the flip side, not every style of mentorship is received well. I think we all have lessons to learn in our own leadership journey. I've gone through that too. My style might not be for everyone. And so I think there's also a bit of give and take in terms of what people expect today as the right the appropriate style of mentorship. Like, we're in this business to make money. Like, we're not here for handouts. We're not, like, I'm not here to help a certain type of founder. I'm here to make sure they're successful and that our fund is successful and we drive money for LPs. We have a bigger mission than that too. But so I'm not sure everyone appreciates that as well.
So along those lines, in terms of the style differences, Claire, just how pushy is Nisha, and what's the worst thing about having her as an MD in terms of her mentoring style?
Be honest, go for it.
No, I think Nisha's feedback, I think from the beginning has been really helpful for me, but I think I'm someone who really likes feedback and like takes that to heart, and that like motivates me to work harder and address feedback. And so I think, to her point, for people who are maybe like more sensitive to feedback, like perhaps that style doesn't work for everyone, but I think she mentioned earlier this framework that we have. I think it makes it, and I think generally at BBG we have an approach of like being very specific with like specific goals and KPIs like across everything that we do, including professional development. And so I think that over time made it quite clear to me. And actually, like before I got promoted, I even like had that framework and was like, this is why I think I should be a partner. And they ended up coming and telling me that I was getting promoted before I had to have that conversation. But I think we actually like got to the same place at the same time because of that framework. And I had all these examples on my side of like how I'd hit the milestones that they talked about. And so I think it's just helpful to get like real time feedback, but then also have this like way to reflect and measure like quarter over quarter and year over year, like how I've grown and why I think I've achieved certain goals or not. So it's been very helpful for me.
Along those lines of
That
education,
was a very kind answer, Claire. Thank you.
along those lines of education and mentorship, and there's a question in the chat about whether there's a community of VCs who take their time to go out and mentor. I just did some mentoring in the NVCA program, but I'm curious if you have taken part or kicked the tires on any useful educational programs outside the firm. I know there's Kaufman, it's super expensive, it's a real, investment. What's out there that you've found useful in terms of learning from other VCs outside the firm? And actually, both of you can answer that because you've both gone through this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just speak for myself, and Claire knows this is actually just my approach. And it was my approach when I was an operator and running a startup. And it's still my approach today, which is like your peers are just an extraordinary group, like learning from other people how they did it. Like Charlie, we talk to you a lot. I talk to Ben's son a lot. And actually, that was a reason I didn't join Kaufman because I felt like I was getting a lot of that just from my own peer network. I think younger folks can be doing the same. I mean, I think self-created communities are extraordinary. For women in particular, there's Women in VC run by Sutian Dong and Jess Peltz, which is an extraordinary group. And so I would highly recommend that one. But Claire probably has
Yeah.
more
I
ideas.
mean, I think Always is another natural one where you have peers that you could talk about benchmarks with. But I think to Nisha's point, like as an emerging manager, our nature is like if we want to build expertise in something or understand how others are doing it, like we just go out and talk to those people. And so I think even in like some of my conversations around professional development and growth, like definitely was talking to my peers about what they're seeing at similar sized funds with similar team structures. And so I think relying on your network and others in the ecosystem has been valuable.
Yeah. Well, and I also think like, people like you, Charlie, people like John Gannon, there are a lot of people. I really like, I think Nicole at Harlem does a lot of posting
Yeah.
on this topic as well. And so in some ways, there's never been more information out there on how to do this job, how to do it well, and how to progress. And I think that, this is where then people can start to take an extra step. I mean, like one of the things Claire and I would always discuss is like, use operators as part of that. Like, what are you learning from operators about this role as well to get better at it? So I think like being creative as well, that extends your network, that makes you more valuable. So I think thinking holistically beyond just kind of like reading venture deals.
So I have a ton of questions, but I'm looking at the time, and I'm going to focus on just a couple before we open it up to the audience, which I'm not entirely sure I know how to do on this platform, but it's fine. I'll figure it out. We just recently hosted a dinner, an educational dinner for like newly minted partners with Fred Wilson, and he made mention of the fact that for him, blogging was a huge tool and an asset, but he had started at a time where there just weren't a lot of people doing it.
Yeah.
And he said now it's maybe not even table stakes, right? Maybe you have to sort of find something else. So I'm quite curious, and Claire in particular going forward, but both of you feel free to answer. When you think about like what the next generation of venture leaders, what skills and traits are going to matter going forward versus what may have led to success of folks in the past. Claire, what do you feel like you need to get good at that, maybe when Nisha was starting out, like wasn't important or just wasn't a thing yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely like companies with AI. And so, as many of us know, it's increasingly competitive. And so, I think we, as a smaller fund, really position our value as like how hands on we are with our companies and really getting them from pre seed or seed to Series A. And I think founders can obviously hear that from us, but I think having founders that can vouch for us. And I think for me, as I also needed founders that I'd worked with over time to be able to vouch for me, to help me to be able to win deals. And so that does obviously take time, but I think, I think that's something that's always been important, but now more than ever, like how you differentiate yourself and have people to back that up as a partner. I think just another one like we've all talked about, which maybe seems straightforward, but with AI, just having like critical thinking skills and the ability to develop a differentiated thesis. And I think it's kind of scary to see some of like the stats that MIT put out around, what AI can do to critical thinking. And so when we think about like people who are really junior and coming up, just always being able to like step back and use your own perspective and thesis is important too.
Nisha, any comments on going forward, what people need?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with Claire completely on the critical thinking piece. I think that will become a differentiator. Like, we're all going to have the same data. We can all do the same one, two, three. So then, like, what happens after that? But I think two things that I've observed, and this has been happening for some time in various ways, and I think it's going to keep evolving. But like, you really have to be a marketer today. And I think the challenge is finding your own version of marketing and playing the game that you want to play, not just playing the game on the field and being the loudest person. For a time, that was Twitter. Now there's something bizarre happening on LinkedIn, but there's also something happening on
That's a
TikTok.
very polite way of putting it.
Yes, yes. I don't think people have figured out what LinkedIn is for other than volume. And so, but there are some people who are having extraordinary success on TikTok. And so I think you have to find your brand of marketing. So for example, like we love grassroots community building. So we run, these like deep focus area events like every couple of months, where we get to sit in a room with 40 founders for a breakfast and really have one-on-one conversations with them. But we also post and we do other things. So I think people are increasingly going to have to find their lane as marketers. And I think that, we've gone from sort of like these big brand names as a platform being enough to now like the individual sort of has to really be out there. And then I think the second thing, and this relates to Claire's point on AI, is I think you really have to have a builder mindset today. And I think this is not just true for venture, but it's true for everyone in any industry. I mean, everyone needs to be figuring out how they can use AI to improve their own workflows, improve their own firm, and also understand how these new builders are building. So I think that is like, this is the moment to sort of really get ahead in that regard.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree on the builder thing. And whether it's brand related, whether it's like I spoke to Sophie from Planeteers the other day, and they have a data business,
Yeah.
right? And I look at what Brad Hargraves is doing with Thesis Driven, and build a platform that obviously would lend itself to doing deals, not necessarily venture deals, real estate debt and all that sort of stuff. And so I think you're seeing that more and more. And I think it helps people build sort of an operator mindset as well, right? Like if you're
Yeah.
actually doing it, you are going to be able to relate to the founders that are,
Yeah.
also trying to
Yeah.
do as well.
And that's what's important to us too. I mean, Susan and I are both former operators, and Claire talked about the fact that we care about KPIs at BBG. I mean, the first lesson I learned as an operator is if you set a goal and you don't check in on that goal every day, every week in terms of growth, you're never going to meet it. And so I think bringing any of those skills, and if you are building the tool within your firm to say like, let's build a tool that helps us drive deal flow, and you're checking in on that, and you're seeing that month on month growth, like you at least have some insight into what a founder is going through.
Cool. I want to pull from the audience a couple questions. So if anyone wants to jump in with something, feel free. One good question, especially for people trying to break in, is there a skill or a type of job other than sort of typical management consulting, you know, investment world that you actually think translates quite well or potentially translates quite well into venture that maybe is atypical?
I mean, I don't think it's atypical, but I think you see a lot of product leaders having success in venture because they've had to they understand the mindset of the user. You have to have a thesis when you're developing a product. You have to understand what a unique value proposition is. I think maybe less than a career path itself is more of a skill. I think people who have the ability to do first principles thinking are the people who win in venture. And I don't think all of us have been trained that way. Like I was not trained that way as a lawyer. I was trained to fill in forms, frankly. So I'm also want to be clear that like I think this can be learned. You just have to really push yourself to do it. But I think there's a real tendency in today's world to read something that somebody else wrote and parrot that back, or to parrot it back with like a sexy new vernacular around it and say that's my thesis. But the people who, the reason Fred Wilson has been so successful is, I think, because he, had a bunch of original thoughts at that time, and that has continued to evolve at USB. So I think first principles thinking is like something you just can't, that's the winning game here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think for early folks on our team, like we've always just talked about, we've seen the ones that are really strong are people who just are naturally curious too. And really like are able to dig into things in a way that's unique. And so I think to Nisha's point, that's like questioning the status quo or trying to build your own perspective. Like, we've had associates who have like watched YouTube videos or like tried to totally teach themselves something, whatever they're trying to learn. And so I think that like curiosity is really critical in venture.
Cool. I'm going to add one that I haven't heard a lot, and I'm going to say enterprise sales. And
Mm.
That I
the
was
reason why
actually sales for like a background as well. I've seen that. Yeah.
cool. So the reason why I say enterprise sales, and it's not being salesy, it's when you do enterprise sales in the way it is done now in a really modern way, it's a bunch of things, right? It is mapping out networks, right? Like who in this big amorphous, company is actually the decision maker, is actually the node, right? Because when you are in venture, you kind of have to map out like where am I going to get good AI deals from, right? And you're sort of plotting around, oh, okay, well, here's the school program. And then there's like people who have already exited, moved on from OpenAI and, whatever, right? So you've got a network map. You obviously have to be a good communicator, right? So that's
Mhm.
really important. And really great salespeople are really great listeners. They're not
Mm.
just parroting, here's what we can do for you. It's like, what do you need help with? Like, what are your biggest problems? What are your objections? And there's a whole like winning the deal thing that doesn't get talked about a lot.
Yeah.
Just understanding like what kind of a partner do you want and figuring out whether I'm a fit for you, right? Because any good enterprise salesperson will tell you like don't spend time with someone you're not a fit for. Go spend time with someone who really needs your particular service. And so I think really good enterprise salesperson would actually do quite well in venture.
I
So
love that.
we'll see. I just wish I had an enterprise sales background. It would have been better.
Well, sales, I think, is important, not just on winning the deal, but running a firm. I mean, to raise money, you have to be good at sales.
Yeah. Yeah, that too, right? That's the other side that doesn't get talked. This is the LP side and running that. Before we go, 10 years from now, we have this conversation with Claire having recently promoted some other person within the firm, right? What would make you both feel as if you succeeded 10 years from now, both individually and like as a firm?
I'm happy to go first. I mean, I think the answer is same for me, both individually and personally, which is like our motto for BBG is like make change, make money. So we want to be remembered as a firm that moved the world forward. And that means backing transformative companies, but having worked with founders who say that we were in some way a critical part of their journey. And that's why we invest in these big categories, right? Like health, financial security, work, climate, because we want to see the world move forward in an arena. And we believe that's part of our polycultural future, which is our thesis. But, I think we really back founders at this intersection of world changing ambition and humility. And there's nothing greater than working with people who are building at that intersection. So I think if those people said that we were a big part of their journey and they built very valuable companies, we would be very happy.
Yeah,
Claire?
I think that was a great answer. I would say there's pretty similar. I mean, I think if you play it out, if we're in a similar position or with more funds years, like that means we've been quite successful in doing what we're doing and have returned capital to LPs and so backed strong companies, as Nisha mentioned. And so I think that's kind of success in itself. And then just to have founders that do feel like we were fundamental to getting there is like very rewarding. And I think that's, how we position ourselves as partners and what a lot of our founders would hopefully say about us as well. But I think that's the ultimate goal.
Cool. Thank you both for spending the time. I really, really appreciate it. I appreciate everybody making time in the middle of their day to listen in and hope to see you all in person soon. Both of you have invites in your inbox that you did not respond to for September 10th. So go fishing into your inbox.
Me too. Yeah. And I think there
Elementary.
was a question in the chat about how you send us founders who might meet our thesis. So you can reach out to us, Nisha at bbgv.com and Claire at bbgv.com.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye. Thanks, Charlie.
No problem.